And good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. Today's an opportunity to learn a little bit more about our ARPA Education and Affordable Childcare Assistance Program. We announced it earlier this week. It's an opportunity for the city to be able to use our ARPA dollars to help students and adults catch up if they were adversely impacted due to the COVID-19 pandemic. It's a really important initiative on behalf of Mayor Cognetti. So we're looking forward to rolling this out and having great participation and being able to help our residents. So with us today, Desi Navarro from Answer Advisory. He's a consultant on the ARPA project, and he'll take it from here to start walking you through the webinar so you could see exactly how to apply.
Awesome. Thank you, Eileen. Appreciate the introduction and happy to be here this morning. So we're going to hop right into it. So again, on the purpose here, really kind of boiling it down to 2 points. Provide an overview of the city's education and affordable child care assistance programs, and then provide insight to some additional grant programs that are coming soon, as well as an overview. Now we're kind of in a nice spot where we've got some that are currently open. We have some that have now closed, but you can just kind of see graphically where the city's at in terms of their community aid project funding availabilities. So overview of the American Rescue Plan Act. So you guys have probably heard that, I'd assume at this point. And may or may not understand that of that 1.9 trillion economic stimulus bill that came out, 365 billion was awarded to state and local governments. And of that 365 billion, Scranton received about 68.7 million of that for their ARPA allocation. Here's a quick overview so that we all kind of just have in our heads the amount of funding that's available in the different programs and initiatives that are out there. So of the 68 million or so that the city's been awarded, they've allocated about 14 million of it for these community aid, community assistance grant programs. And you'll see kind of up at the top here under the public health / education category, we've got a few different subcategories. Some of these programs have actually either been awarded already or currently in progress, but the ones that we're focusing on today are the ones that are highlighted there in the red box. The affordable child care initiatives, literacy and finance, educational programs, as well as just general educational catch-up funding. Graphically, this is kind of where you can see how these kind of fit into some larger buckets. And it kind of helps also define some terms as well that everybody's going to need to be very aware of as we go through this process and start to receive and review applications for the specific program. So as defined by Treasury, the City of Scranton is the recipient of the ARPA funds. And from there, they can distribute those funds in a variety of different ways through these community programs and initiatives. One is through what are called subrecipient programs, and the other is through direct beneficiary grants. So the City of Scranton has taken an approach where they've kind of done and set up programs for both. The Childcare and Educational Assistant Grant Program, the one on the very far right there, will be done as a subrecipient program. And the next slide will kind of define some of these terms for us so we can see the specifics. As I stated before, the City of Scranton is defined as the recipient in Treasury's eyes, and they have the ability to administer some of these funds to community through either subrecipient programs or direct beneficiary grants. So what is a subrecipient? Well, a subrecipient is somebody that's going to really carry out a program or initiative on behalf of the City of Scranton. So in order to do that, they are going to be tasked and responsible with determining who is eligible to receive federal assistance according to Treasury's requirements. They'll be responsible for measuring their performance based on meeting objectives of the federal program as designed. They'll be responsible for some programmatic decision-making of that program and responsible for ensuring federal requirements that are outlined in the award are followed, and that the uses of the federal funds are carried out. And typically, the uses of the federal funds are carried out as a program as opposed to providing goods and services. So that's typically the definition of a subrecipient. Really, it's kind of that conduit that the city can use and award funds to then serve residents and community members within the city. A beneficiary, on the other hand, is really just it's an individual or it could be an organization that's receiving the funds either as an end user or an entity directly benefiting from the financial assistance or the award. And the beneficiary is not tasked with determining eligibility or compliance. So for this program, it's important to note this is being administered as a subrecipient program. So what does that mean? Well, that means that the eligible entities that can apply for this are, eligible third-party nonprofits, private or government organizations, and that they will be, like I said before, required to carry out a program on behalf of the city while adhering to Treasury's guidance. And so anytime you see 2 CFR 200 in this slide, that's basically kind of the abbreviation for federal funding requirements in regards to procurement, in regards to contracts, all the key terms that the feds like to see implemented when you're using or applying their funding. For this program, this entity or subrecipient must identify an educational or childcare assistance program that fights the impact COVID has had on community, and then design or fund a program, within that category that directly responds to and in a proportional manner to the impacts that community has seen. The program must be designed, and this is a pretty key requirement here for this specific program and this subrecipient role, is it must be designed to serve the impacted population as defined by Treasury. So the way Treasury defines that are, residents or folks within the community that are at the 65% area median income level or 300% federal poverty guideline limit, or less, right? So it's really those low to moderate income folks that are eligible beneficiaries of this program that the subrecipient would be offering and running on behalf of the city. It should also be noted that one of the city's mission and guiding principles here is to give greater consideration and priority to those projects or programs that serve disproportionately impacted or economically disadvantaged individuals within the city or the community. So per Treasury's guidance, an impacted individual are those folks, again, that meet those requirements of the 65% AMI or 300% FPG. But there is a subset there of a disproportionately impacted or more impacted, individual or group of folks. It's really at the 85% AMI or 185% FPG level. And, the city, part of their initiative is to really try and focus in and make sure that funding and programs are available for those folks to serve those folks in the community that really kind of meet that requirement. So talking through some examples of eligible uses, starting with the childcare grants. So as a subrecipient, you could put in an application for any number of these examples of eligible uses. You can, in addition to this, if you want to get creative and you've got something else that you'd like to pitch or propose, you can do that. But again, these are the 5 initiatives here that the city's really identified as important to them. So we kind of recommend sticking to this as closely as you can. The first would be funding for new or existing affordable childcare services or K through 12 educational programs, again, designed in response to the COVID-19 pandemic and its impact. Could be for funding to support new or expanded affordable childcare services for impacted and disproportionately impacted households and communities within the city. Funding for increased access to affordable childcare services. Funding for efforts to bolster, support, or preserve existing childcare services, or improvements to or new construction of childcare and daycare facilities that may support existing new or expanded programs. Again, with those programs supporting and serving those folks that meet that low to moderate income level. As far as the educational grants, some examples of uses that the subrecipient can apply for there as well. It would be funding for offering high quality tutoring and other extended learning opportunities, funding for differentiated instruction, funding to implement activities that meet the comprehensive needs of K-12 students within Scranton, funding to improve and expand language access for parents and families, funding to provide information and assistance to parents and families on how they can effectively support students, including in a distance learning environment, funding to improve student engagement in distance education, and then last, funding for administering and using high quality assessments to assess students' academic progress. And again, these also are programs for these specific uses that have to be aimed at and developed for those low to moderate income families or those that would qualify. So who would then be the beneficiaries of this program? And hopefully this isn't too repetitive, but it is a very important key point here, right? So the eligible beneficiaries now are those folks within Scranton, those households, those residents, those community members that are eligible, impacted, and disproportionately impacted individuals, classes, or groups within city limits. So, and that is as defined by Treasury. So one more time, according to Treasury's guidance, a moderate income household at or below 65% AMI or 300% FPG would be considered impacted. Those that are kind of the low income at the 40% AMI or the 185% FPG are those that are qualified as disproportionately impacted. In addition to that, if a resident or a household is located within a qualified census tract within the city or receives services provided by tribal governments, they are automatically assumed to be disproportionately impacted as well. There are very useful tools on the city's website. There is actually a disproportionately and impacted map on the city's website. It's highlighted, it's very clear, so you can see what kind of, places within the city are, meet the requirements of the impacted, which meet the requirements of the disproportionately impacted. It also shows the qualified census tracts. Hopefully that's a useful tool, that a subrecipient can use and reference in developing, their eligibility requirement component of this program. So with all of this said, I'm going to kick it over to Chris, and he's going to talk to us a little bit about how to actually apply through Neighborly for these different opportunities.
Again, good morning, everybody. My name is Chris Hughes. I am the city's ARPA Communications and Information Manager. I'm going to walk you through a little bit of the process on how to apply for these grants in Neighborly. This is the city's Neighborly website. I am going to drop a link in the chat while I'm talking here. And this is going to be important for anybody who's applying for the first time. We want to make sure that you're able to access Neighborly. When you come to the site, you're actually going to land on the sign-in page. But if you're new to the ARPA process, which I believe some, if not all of you are, you're going to want to register for the site the first time. So you're going to need to put in your email address. It will send you a verification code. That code often lands in a junk or spam folder. So make sure you check those folders from Neighborly. For some reason, we can't convince email clients to accept Neighborly emails as being valid. So we want to make sure that you check those folders for your verification code and then use that information to log into your Neighborly account. This is the screen that you will see when you log in for the first time. So welcome to the City of Scranton's portal. In the bottom here, there's a couple of different programs that the city operates through Neighborly. So we want to make sure, obviously, that you click the right one. The homebuyer program will not be the right one. The small business micro grant will not be the right one. You're going right in the middle, and you're going to choose the ARPA program. Select this option to apply for funds through the American Rescue Plan Act. So we're going to start a new application. We're going to make a test education grant. For some reason, it requires you to hit this button in the beginning. So we're just going to click right to continue through to the application. And we're going to be on the program overview page. So again, as Desi had mentioned a couple of times, want to make it clear that these are going to be subrecipient programs for both affordable childcare and educational improvement and literacy and financial literacy programs. So in this drop-down menu, you are going to select the subrecipient award. And it's going to be one of the top 2 selections currently. So nonprofit award for the implementation of literacy finance program, or excuse me, top 3. Nonprofit award for implementation of educational catch-up or affordable childcare or after-school programs. I'm just going to go right in the middle again. Seems to be a good place to be today. And I dropped in the chat a link to the city's qualified census tract and disproportionately impacted map. There is a link here for convenience when you go through. That appears to be a PDF map. So that may be an inaccurate one. I'm going to make sure as a follow-up to this meeting that we send folks the proper links, but the link in the chat is to the actual QCT map. You can put in the address for your organization in the top left and see if you fall in those areas within the city. So anything in the red is going to be disproportionately impacted. If it's surrounded by a dotted line, it's going to be in the qualified census tract. And if it's in green, it's in an impacted area of the city. So we're going to select yes for now, just to keep moving. And we're going to continue through to the next section. One thing I want to note as we get started is it is possible to start your Neighborly application and come back and save as you go. Oh, Erica, thank you. Erica dropped another link in the chat there for the map. So it is possible to start this and complete it in sections. This is going to be one of the programs that we accept all the applications and then review after the March 7th deadline. So there's no urgency necessarily in a first come, first serve sort of scenario to get your application done quickly, but we do want to make sure that folks are able to get started. The contact information section in section A is a pretty standard: legal name of the organization, a DBA if you have one, your CEO's name, your EIN, physical address, really standard information. Email address is going to be important. Organization telephone number. Those are going to help us later on if we have questions about your application or need additional information submitted as part of the review process. If you are submitting as a representative of your organization and not the CEO or anything like that, we strongly encourage you to make sure that you've got proper contact information here in A12 and A13. That's going to help us out tremendously if we do have questions about your application as you go on. So I'm just going to move to section B. So this is your organizational information. The date that your organization was founded. We discovered a flaw in this field. If you had an organization that was founded in the 1800s, for some reason, it wouldn't accept it. So we had to add a second field here. I think I can thank my alma mater for that one because they were founded back in the 1800s. Your tax exemption status, if that's applicable, the geographic areas that you serve. Obviously, we're looking for service to the city of Scranton, but if your organization does serve outside of that, we want to make sure we know that as well. Mission statement and purpose. Are you registered and in good standing with the city and current with taxes and trash fees? This is incredibly important. We want to make sure that we're supporting the organizations that are current on all those taxes and trash fees. So we want to make sure that we check that. We're in constant contact with our licensing office as well as the single tax office to make sure that organizations are up to date on their taxes. Are any of the organization's staff or board members immediate family members of city staff or an elected official? Your part-time employees, full-time employees, the services that you provide, the typical demographic areas that you serve. Does the organization count persons served or households served? So this is really how you determine your services. A lot of our nonprofit agencies really calculated this based on households. For some of the business grant applications that we have open over the next couple months, those are marking persons served or transactions. So that's one simple way to sort of break that down. And then we ask you if you have those numbers available to submit them as well. Section C is where we really start to get into your plan for the city. So your financial request amount is going to be here. The childcare, affordable childcare grants are going to be accepting applications for programs up to the full allocation of $500,000. We understand that these programs are not going to be easy to implement. They're not going to be very cheap to implement. So there is a potential that an organization can submit a single application worth the entire amount. And after the review process, we may determine that that is a final awardee. But we want to encourage everybody to submit their best plan to be eligible for this potential funding. This is really important. I want to stop for a second here and talk about section C2. If your grant amount request is greater than $500,000, provide a sam.gov ID number. Want to stop here because this is really important. The unfortunate thing that kind of emerged is because of organizations applying for ARPA funding across the country, it did sort of create a bottleneck in the review process. And unfortunately, there's a number of websites that have popped up that are charging fees to get your sam.gov ID number. Cannot recommend enough that you do not pay for your sam.gov ID number. This is a free service that's provided by the government. We want to make sure that if you start the process, you give us your case ID or your application ID number. It may take you a little bit to obtain a sam.gov ID number if you don't already have one, but cannot stress enough that if you do come across a website that asks you to pay a fee for a sam.gov ID number, that you do not use that service. And I missed a point that I wanted to talk about up here in the financial request amount. The literacy, financial literacy, and educational improvement grants are going to be for grants up to $250,000. So I forgot to mention that delineation. The type of grant requested. So this is going to be, for you folks, again, a subrecipient award, either for new programs and services to provide aid or to support existing programs and services. I know there's a couple of folks that registered for the call that have existing childcare services in the area. So that would be for the support of existing programs, or if you're building something new in the city, which again, another valuable application, that would be your checkbox here. C4, in short, is basically what we would refer to as a grant narrative. So we need to know the details of what you're trying to build in terms of these childcare and educational programs. So give us everything. Let us know the communities that you're trying to serve, why the need exists in that particular portion of the community, and let us know the full details of what you're trying to build as part of these grant programs. So section D for this group is going to be a no. Are you applying for the direct beneficiary grant? Again, these are going to be subrecipient grants. I'm going to mark no here so that you guys can see it. It does come up with some conditional answers. If you're applying for the subrecipient award, select complete and continue. So I'm going to do that because it's going to yell at me for giving an answer and then not saving my progress. So in here, your subrecipient award. When you select yes, there's conditional logic. It produces a whole additional section of questions. Has your organization previously managed or utilized federal grant money or support in the past? The applicant agrees that it will be able to have all funds contracted or obligated by September 30, 2024 and fully expended by September 30, 2026. These are really important dates. So I'm going to stop here for just a moment. The city, based on the rules set by the Treasury for this federal funding, has an obligation to make a plan for these funds by December of 2024. We backed that up to September of 2024 to give us some time for contingency. And the funds, currently the deadline for funding to be spent is December of 2026. We again back that up to September just for contingency purposes. So we want to make sure that as you implement and plan for these programs, that funding will have to be spent by September of 2026. This is in addition to your grant narrative. Describe how the plan, project, and program responds to the needs created by the COVID-19 public health emergency. Obviously, for the educational assistance programs, we know that there are pandemic learning losses. If your program addresses those, there is data out there, both locally from the Institute on Public Policy and Economic Development, or nationally, if you have the ability to cite some of that. We know the needs exist, but if you have the opportunity to discuss some of that, let us know. We also know that affordable childcare is an incredible need in the community. It impacts the ability of parents and guardians to be able to work, to support their families. And so if you can illustrate any of those causes as to why you're attempting to build or apply for these grants, that's going to be very helpful for us in our review process. Again, E4 is a little bit more of the same. How does the plan, project, or program respond to the needs created by the COVID-19 public health emergency? Applicants can describe how the new or existing program is designed to respond directly to the impact above. E5, describe the goals and objectives of the new or existing project or program. If you are introducing, again, services in an area physically of the city where they do not exist, that's important to note for our consideration. So think about that as you're going through this process. Describe how the project or program proposed will continue to be viable on its own after the city and ARPA funding is fully expended. So this is a real important note. I'll pause here for a moment. We want to make sure that we're not just offering seed money. We want to make sure that the programs that are funded by ARPA, by the city's ARPA money, are going to be sustainable. It's it's one thing to offer funding. It's another thing to build something that can sustain itself for years to come. And that's what we want to do. Right now, we're all kind of collectively climbing out of the impacts of the pandemic. How do we sustain these programs, and how will you sustain these programs once that funding is over? The number of households and the groups that you hope to impact through your grant application. So 1 to 100, 100 to 500, and then disproportionately or potentially disproportionately impacted groups here. And how does your project or program include voices from disproportionately impacted groups? Have you engaged with other community partners in your program? So that's important to note. It could be a part of your sustainability narrative as to how you're going to continue impacting different areas of the community. We'll move ahead to section F. Oh, it's yelling at me. See, I told you it would yell at me. I'm going to click proceed so we can keep going. Alternate funding. That feature is actually, I'm complaining about it because we're presenting to everybody, but it's actually a great feature because if you do make changes, it's going to force you to sort of save your application. So it is a protection. I'm being cranky on a Friday. So alternate funding. This is a really important section, and I'll talk about why in just a minute. Has your organization received other COVID-19 funding assistance, including CARES Act, payroll protection, economic injury disaster loans, or CDBG coronavirus funds? Are there other grants that the organization has currently applied for or intends to apply for? Does the organization currently employ or have access to a grant writer, and has the organization previously managed or utilized federal grant money or support in the past? This section is particularly important for the city's review because the Treasury has offered a set of rules that really prevent what's referred to as a duplication of benefits. Desi's going to get into this a little bit more as we talk about budgets at the end of the webinar, but I'll touch on it here for just a minute. So the important thing to note is the city cannot, per the rules of the Treasury, continue to offer funding for programs that have already received funding. There are opportunities for what is commonly referred to as grant stacking. But for example, if you have an organization that has received funding, I'll talk about as a, for instance, one of the business loans. If you received CARES Act and payroll protection loan as a business owner, and then you approach the city as an applicant for an economic recovery grant, if the aid that you have received already covers the cost or the impacts, the financial impacts of the pandemic, the city cannot consider additional funding that would necessarily be seen as in excess to the losses that you've experienced. So if, for example, you have an existing childcare organization and you've received CDBG funding, those are things that are important for us to note because we need to make sure, per the rules of the Treasury, that we're not adding funding where we could be creating impact in other areas. I'll go into the financial and insurance information in section G. So this is revenue for the past fiscal year, projected revenue for your current fiscal. Now that we're in January of 23, I'm sure many of you folks are looking at your financials as you're preparing to file your taxes if you haven't already. So we, Desi, correct me if I'm wrong here, but we would be looking at revenue for potentially 2022 if organizations run a January 1 to December 31 fiscal year, correct?
Right, correct.
Oh, got it. So your projected revenue for 2023, your projected expenses for 2023, and then if your dates do differ from that January 1 to December 31, some folks operate on a July 1 or an October 1, let us know the dates covered by your organization's fiscal year. That'll help us determine the numbers that you're submitting. And then describe how the organization typically raises funds pre-COVID-19. A lot of the childcare programs, I'm sure, are going to be based on some particular profit model or anything like that. I don't know of any daycares that necessarily do fundraising or gala events or anything like that. But if you do, let us know that those exist. In section G6, your general liability insurance, your automobile liability insurance, and your workers' compensation. So this is the required documents. I'm going to breeze over a couple because we're going to talk about budgets and duplication of benefits in just a little bit, but I do want to touch on them. We do have sample documents here for some of the sections that may be unfamiliar to you folks as applicants, in particular, the duplication of benefits. And then for you folks, the itemized budget number 1, exhibit 1 for subrecipient awards. So those are going to be the two major things. I'll run through the remainder, but this is where we usually typically get a lot of questions, so don't be afraid to ask. Copies of your IRS W-9 forms, copies of your tax returns or IRS 990 forms for the 3 most recent years, if applicable. Copy of your IRS letter or certificate verifying tax exempt status, if applicable. If you're a nonprofit, the list of your board of directors, articles of incorporation, list of monetary or in-kind donations from the city, last 2 fiscal years of audited financial statements, along with an audited opinion for the more recent fiscal year, or an unaudited financial statement along with a certified statement from your organization's president and treasurer, 2 fiscal years of bank statements, copies of invoices showing an increase in administrative or program costs for the last 2 years, if applicable, past due rent and mortgage statements, if applicable. A lot of these apply for recovery grants, but want to touch on them here if needed. Past due utility bills, if applicable. A disclosure statement if your owner or owners hold a greater than 10% interest in the company or organization. And then there is an open section down here for the completion of additional documents. Through the review process, there may be additional documents that we need you folks to submit and want to make sure that we have kind of an open area for the submission of those pieces. If you are able to complete all of those pieces, it will allow you to submit. It will not allow me to click on it because I have not answered hardly anything on this application. But once you get there, the submission process, that'll alert us on the neighborly side of things. If there are pieces that we need to review as part of your application, we will be able to send you what are referred to as tasks in neighborly. Again, a lot of email clients we've experienced do not look at neighborly emails kindly. They think they're either junk or spam emails. So we will do our best to follow up with an individual email to your organization, but I cannot stress enough that it's going to be important as you apply through this process to check your spam and your junk folders, just in case you get any alerts from us through the neighborly system.
So thank you for that, Chris. Really good information on the application itself. So now we're going to run through a couple of the specific uploaded requirement, your documents required for upload as part of your application, starting with the program budget. So this is kind of a little snapshot of if you were to open that link on Neighborly, what would pull up. It's a PDF that's broken into a couple of different columns and rows for a budget category, a budget description, and then an amount in this cell here. And what we're asking for you all to do is, in addition to your application narrative, let us know the budget for the actual program, whether that's funding an existing program or funding a new program or an expansion of an existing program. How much is it going to cost and how much are you applying for, and where does that cost kind of sit in these different categories of administration, maybe professional services, attorney fees if needed, training, supplies, other costs, things like that. So we're asking you to populate this. It's important to note that one, this is not going to be necessarily your organization's yearly budget. This should be reflective of the new or the existing program that you're looking to fund specifically with these grant ARPA dollars. It's also important to note that as a subrecipient, there will be agreement that'll come along with this, and there is a reimbursement request process that comes along with this. So just to note that, in general, the city is setting this up on a reimbursement basis, where every quarter you'll have an opportunity to submit a request for reimbursement. Here are the costs that we expended this year based on the program that we are awarded for. Here's where all the costs went. Providing that evidence, and then receiving funding from the city that way. There may be some exceptions to that rule, but in general, I think that's how they're looking to set up and establish these programs. So this Exhibit 1 is a very important exhibit to fill out and upload with your application. The next one, I'm including this, and this is one, and I think this also comes with the fact that you're trying to be efficient here with the Neighborly system and using this for multiple grants. This is specifically called the beneficiary budget exhibit, but just note there is an opportunity for this program that if there is a capital expenditure, and that's really, I think, maybe the better term for this worksheet here, is that if as part of your program, again, whether it's a new, an existing, or an expansion, there is the need for a capital expenditure associated with this. So this could be, maybe a small expansion construction project, some kind of equipment or major purchase that's needed with it. What we're also asking, or what we'll ask you to fill out is, and this may not apply to everybody, for the most part, if you're just applying for the administration, running for and managing, kind of the personnel costs and some minor supplies, you don't need to worry about this form. But again, if it's a major capital expenditure that will directly support that program and you'd like to include that as part of your grant application, we'll ask you to fill this out too. And this is just an opportunity for the city to see that, especially if it's a construction related project or a renovation or something like that, that will support the program, that it's been thought through, that it's been budgeted, and it looks reasonable, because there is risk associated with that, right? And so we just want to make sure that from a risk standpoint, things look to be in order. So not everybody will have to fill this out, but if you do need one, you can pull it down from Neighborly. Please feel free also, if there are questions about that, to reach out to Chris, Erica. They can reach out to me as well. And we can kind of run you through if you would need this kind of exhibitor form to be filled out, or if you just need to do Exhibit 1. And then the critical form as well, and Chris had mentioned this in the alternate funding section of the application. It's this duplication of benefit review. As Chris stated, Treasury is very explicit because they know there's a lot of COVID funding that's out there. They've released various funding initiatives as well through other PPP grants. The CARES Act was out there. There's alternate funding that's been made available. And so what we need to do, and the exercise that we're asking you all as subrecipients to do, is to disclose if you received any alternate funding related to this impact or this use. So for example, this use that you guys will be applying for is for that new, existing, or expanded program, whether it's education, childcare assistance, or the literacy. And if you've received alternate funding to support that same program or initiative from federal, state, or local sources, we're asking for you to disclose that. And the way that you'll use this form is there's blank cells below, or if it falls into one of the categories above, you can populate the date received and the amount received cells directly from that. But otherwise, if it doesn't, you can just specifically list out the name of the alternate funding that you received, the date that you received it, the amount that you received it. What we're also asking for you to do when you list the name, not only give us the name of the funding source, but give us the use so that we can confirm that, is this the same use or impact that you're currently applying for, this program to serve community, or was it for something different? Because that's going to go into the overall calculation to determine, is there still an unmet need to fund this program, or has that need now been already addressed through alternate funding sources? If it's already been addressed and you were to receive additional funding through this program, that would be classified as a duplication of benefit, which is what we need to avoid. So what you would want to make sure, and what we want to make sure we're clear on, is what you populate in the unmet need cell is the total value of this program, new, existing, or expanded, that you're pitching or you're proposing for funding. So it should be the value of that. In most cases, it'll be that same Exhibit 1 total dollar amount is what you're going to then take and transfer to this, and then let us know if you've received any alternate funding for that same program. So those are the key items. What I'm also going to suggest as well is on the city's website, you'll see there's a link to a pretty detailed guideline document. And in that document, it goes through a lot of the information that we talked through today. It also lists out the required documentation that the subrecipient will need to submit. And again, trying to reiterate that, Neighborly at this point, it's a great system. We're using it for a lot of different grant opportunities. So there are, and as Chris was going through that list, there are some required documents that say, if applicable. They're intentionally labeled that way because we're hoping that you'll review the guidance that's online, and you'll see the required documentation section, and just read through that, and it'll tell you what you as a subrecipient for this specific program need to upload into Neighborly. And then you can leave the ones that are, if applicable, and aren't specifically called out in that guidance document, just leave them blank, and you'll be good to go. So that's the last thing I'll say on that. And then this slide here is just kind of a quick recap of the timeline, so everybody's on the same page. So the application actually opened up on the 24th. So this is the first info session on it that we're having this Friday. There is a deadline for application submissions on March 7th of 2023. So I would encourage you all, thanks for attending this meeting. Hopefully it's helpful. If it raised some questions, we'll try and address some of those real time here at the end of this meeting. But if there are any additional follow-up questions, or as you get into the application, and you're kind of at your computer, in your office or at home trying to fill this out and you have questions, the sooner that you can send those in and ask them, the better off we'll be in terms of, meeting that deadline. Following the closing of the applications, then there'll be about a 3 to 4 week application review period. During that review period, you may get some additional questions from some of our grant reviewers, whether that's some of the teams that are looking at the eligibility side of it. Maybe it's some of the teams that are looking at the scoring side of it. There may be some information that we may request that you follow up with during that period. So to Chris's point, just make sure that you're checking your inbox regularly, because if we have a question out there and we don't hear back from you, it may force us to move down to the next person on the list. So just be aware of that. Then there'll be some award determinations made by about mid-April. And then following that, shortly after that, the city will begin drafting their subrecipient agreements and getting those released and signed and executed, so that you all can then, be off and running with starting to do all the good work that you guys would have been applying for this grant program, and starting to make some of these services available to community.
I don't have anything to add at this point, but we've certainly gotten a couple questions, and so I'm gonna start from the top here. I have a couple questions. How long is the reimbursement process? So I'm assuming that's a question about if you were to submit a draw for reimbursement to the city through the Neighborly portal, about how long does that take? I'm gonna actually toss that answer over to Eileen. You know a little bit more about the reimbursement process than I do.
Sure. Once the business, the nonprofit business, whichever it is, submits their invoice through the Neighborly system, it should probably take us approximately a week to get the check out to you. Generally, we put it in the mail, so that might extend the process a little bit, but it is a reasonably quick turnaround time, as long as you submit all of the information we need to process that.
Second, do you have to be a registered business in Scranton?
In this instance, no, you do not, but you need to be able to document and prove to us that you are serving. The majority of the people that you are serving are physically located in the city of Scranton and meet the low to moderate income eligibility criteria or the qualified census tract criteria.
Yeah, these are going to be similar to the wellness grants and the nonprofit recovery grants that we executed. So if you do provide services to folks within the city of Scranton, we will need to document that somehow as part of the process. Please repeat how one asks questions when preparing their grant. So if you have questions for the city's ARPA team, you can email me directly. I am going to throw my email in the chat real quick. If I can't answer for you directly, I can ask it to Desi to make sure we get the proper information out to you folks. Again, these are all going to be relatively new programs. You may ask a question that we haven't encountered as part of the ARPA grant process yet so far. So we want to make sure that we get you the right information so that you can be ready to go. I do have a couple questions that were asked directly to me and not to everybody in the chat. I hope it's okay that I share those with the group. So can grants be combined with CDBG grants or HUD job creation grants? I'm going to start by saying that as long as the need still exceeds what you've received in terms of those grant funding, we will need to record any potential duplication of benefits. So let's say, for example, you submit for a program that has a budget of $250,000 and you've gotten $50,000 in CDBG grants. We, as the city, because of the duplication of benefits that exists there, we would only be able to consider funding for 200 of that $250,000. So the important thing is we can't add what you've already been given. That's really the main thing that would occur in terms of that sort of grant stacking that would exist. Must programs serve a minimum percentage of low to moderate income families? That's a great question. Desi, I don't know if you have any additional input on that.
I do. Yeah. So it's actually required to make sure that it does serve the low to moderate income population. So it actually is not an eligible use of funds to serve anybody that doesn't fall within that criteria. So as part of the program, if you were to be awarded funding, we would need to make sure that you all have an internal process for verifying, income limits for folks within the city before they were offered the service that it is that you guys would be providing. There is also, a way that we can work with you to do this on a more simplified administration basis, because there is data available in those QCT maps, and those impacted maps, online are available. We can actually use those to then basically just do an eligibility review based on where the resident lives, as opposed to having to ask them to verify their income limits. We just have to be upfront in the program guidance and how you're setting up your program, that it is that you're using that map as opposed to individual income verification. But you can do it both ways. But the short answer to that question is the program must be designed to serve specifically those impacted and or disproportionately impacted folks.
Thank you for that, Desi. Another question: are capital costs reimbursement only as well? That's a lot of money for a nonprofit to put up front if it is a major capital project. It's a great point, Desi. I'll let you jump in on that.
Yeah, and I'll also let Eileen to piggyback on anything here as well. I think in general, the city is looking to do these on a reimbursement basis. However, there may be exceptions, kind of as we noted before, depending on the nonprofit, the project that it is, the risk level of that project, where the city may opt to, provide funding on the front end of that and then follow up with the paperwork on the back end. But I think we're trying to limit that as much as possible, because there is some exposure there and there is timelines that we've got to work to in terms of getting the information recorded and updated. But in general, reimbursement. But again, there may be some one-off.
Yeah, and Desi, I'll just piggyback on that. You are correct. Reimbursement is what we're trying to do. But there are instances, and we're taking them case by case, where if you have an estimate on the capital project, we would give you a portion of the funding to start off with until you can start getting some actual documented information that you've paid, and we can reimburse you. But just if you have an instance like that, please reach out to Erica or Chris and we can talk you through it.
Another question in the chat: does the percentage of Scranton residents that the organization serves need to be a certain number? We serve residents from across the region, including Scranton residents. Desi or Eileen, I'll let you jump in on that. I know that we obviously want to make sure that there is an impact for Scranton residents. I don't think it needs to be disproportional towards Scranton residents, but I will let Desi or Eileen jump in to clarify there.
Sure. Eileen, you want to go first?
Sure. We don't have a specific number. We would like to see it to be at least significant in your population. But back to what Desi talked about earlier, the real issue is to make sure that the individuals are eligible with a low to moderate income or in the qualified census tract.
And then the final question in the chat, and feel free, folks, if you have additional questions while we're on today, make sure you drop them in the chat. The final question that I see in my window is, would businesses who did not receive any COVID grant funding in the past receive higher scoring over others who may have? I don't believe that's the case. I don't think there's any scoring multipliers or additional consideration for businesses who've not received aid. The important thing for us to consider is, again, that duplication of benefits, because the rules of the Treasury are very specific on this. We want to make sure that there's equal opportunity for folks to access funding, but I don't believe that we've discussed any sort of scoring modifiers for anyone who hasn't received COVID grant funding in the past.
You are correct, Chris. So the only benefit would be there'd be no duplication of benefits. So you'd be eligible for a larger award as opposed to having the duplicated benefits subtracted off your request.
Appreciate everybody's time. Thank you. And if that's all, have a wonderful Friday.